episode 2 of the Wednesday Word. Today I decided to include the plants. My orchids, some of my orchids are blooming, and what better way to hopefully start thinking positive, happy thoughts about spring. That makes me happy, so I thought I would share. At any rate, today our word is understand, or possibly even you could consider understand versus innerstand. So, when I began this journey with words after studying history and law for a while and realizing how important comprehension of words was, one of the first things that came up was realizing the etymology of understand is quite different than what we often think of it as. And many people in the state national or American national, American state national community, when they start getting into words, they start realizing that maybe words aren't what they think. We have already covered that before, but understand is one of the words people often get stuck on. And I am no different than anyone else. I also got stuck on it. So before I dive straight into the word understand, I wanted to preface by just explaining that a little bit. One of the things many of us do is we find people that we like to listen to, that we trust what they're going to say, because we live in a busy world and doing research is very time consuming. So we find people that we think we can just believe, and then we don't do our own research, right? It happens to all of us, including me. And I fell into that trap in the very beginning of my word adventure with the word understand. And I immediately came to that conclusion that, well, while it's true that you can break the word understand into two words, under and stand, and come to the simple conclusion that it simply means to stand under someone or something, that may not always be the case. So today I'm just going to dive right into understand, and we'll just start, which I am finding that Bard is valuable, which PS, Bard is now Gemini. Remember, Bard is bear with me here while I try to get the screen up. It's giving me a little rough time. Bard is now Gemini, which Bard was Google's AI engine. And for some reason, my share screen is not cooperating very well. So bear with me just a moment while I try to get it up. Oh, here we go. All right. And here we are at Gemini, aka Bard, with Google's AI engine. And one of the reasons I found this to be super handy was that it's very easy to just jump right into the etymology. Again, I still think that we need to double check our resources when we're using any AI, but I really do like the option of using the AI to just springboard us right into the conversation. So I'm really thinking that I'll probably continue to do that. So as we go through this, notice that the word understand has a fascinating and slightly confusing etymology. It goes on, of course. The origin in the Germanic, it entered English from Middle English, understanden, which itself came from the Old English verb understanden, en versus an in the latter. En first, an last. Proto-Germanic, its roots lie in Proto-West Germanic, understanden, an, meaning to stand between, to understand. So in other words, it didn't mean necessarily originally, according to Gemini AI, to stand under. It was actually more to stand between. So that's an interesting point to consider. We go down to the breakdown on those prefixes, knowing that it wasn't just stand, it was stand in. An is what they're using in this example. Under, the prefix doesn't mean below in this case, but rather comes from an older meaning of among, between, in the presence of. Stand in This is Old English. It's a verb to stand, which forms the basis of our modern stand. So stand-in is really just like stand. It's not all that different, but under is somewhat different than what I feel that we most commonly use in reference today, because it's among or between or in the presence of, as opposed to be actually underneath or below something. That is not the original context of under. Fascinating. So here we go. Possible interpretations. Literal. Some linguists believe the literal interpretation is closest to the original meaning, to stand between, in other words, ideas and information, to stand between ideas and information as a way to grasp them fully. So this to me implies that it gives us an opportunity to consider the ideas and information that we're standing between. That's just what comes to mind when I read that. Now, metaphorically, this says others suggest a more metaphorical understanding. To stand under something complex, placing yourself beneath it to examine it thoroughly. So here I'm going to stop for just a moment. I don't know how much more of this I'm going to read. In fact, no, I think I'm going to stop right there. So I will come back here. And one of the things that comes up a lot in the state national community about understand is the concern over using understand in the reference of in a court case. And if you were to say answer a judge asking you if you understood something, that you would be acquiescing to being beneath the judge, as far as like a pecking order, right? So when we start to analyze this, it becomes somewhat interesting and perhaps questionable. And there may be some information out there to prove that. I'm just not sure right now in my initial analysis of trying to go through this whole understand deal, if that's necessarily the case. So that would bring us to, let's go look at the dictionaries. Let's look at the law dictionaries, right? This is something that I brought up briefly in the past, how different dictionaries have different uses. There may be a lot of people who realize that, but then there may be some that don't. So it's a good subject nonetheless, in my opinion, to bring up. So let's flip over here. I'm going to share my screen again. And I had started working on this a while ago. I'm not going to go into great detail with all of the things that I was originally typing when I began this. I originally was looking at understand versus innerstand versus overstand. And I'll actually flip back to that in a moment on the Gemini AI application to show what it says about the difference between understand and innerstand. One of the things I'll add here is that my goal is not necessarily to give you a bottom line answer here. What I want to do is encourage you to do your own research and study this kind of material on your own, to get excited about doing research. I can't tell you how many people are often telling me that they don't know how to research things. And research is just looking for information, learning about how to find valid resources to validate the information that you find. And the best way for any of us to learn how to do research, in my opinion, is to just dive right in. So that's all I'm here to do. We're going to have fun with words, and hopefully that'll be somewhat eye-opening and help you learn to do more research. So of course, feel free to put questions in the comments and let me know what you think, and give me any feedback on what you think about words, or any even specific words that relate to each Wednesday word. All right. So back at it. When I was originally going through and researching this, I started to kind of write a little bit to prompt me on what to say. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of a script. And so let's talk about dictionaries a little bit. So you've got Black's Law dictionaries, which these have been around for a long time, typically back into the 1800s. You can certainly look up the history of these dictionaries if you like. Perhaps someday I'll cover those in a Wednesday Word, but I need to do some more research so that I can do that properly. So Black's Law specifically, or Black's Dictionary, is about the legal law system. Mostly that's where it's used in my comprehension. It could also just be a common law, but it's my comprehension that it typically leans more towards the statutory legal law system as opposed to the common law, lawful, not codified, but lawful common law. Bouvier's typically is more toward equity, or which is a more private jurisdiction typically. I speculate there is a little tiny piece of the equity jurisdiction that it is exposed to the public, but it's got to be a little tiny piece. So I'm still working on my comprehension around the law. As I've stated in the past, it will likely be a lifelong study, and this relates directly to that. So again, give me comments if you know something more about the equity juris in law. I would be happy to hear about what you know. So there's Bouvier. I have to look up the pronunciation. It's French. And that typically leans toward equity court. I believe there may be a little crossover between both Blacks and Bouvier's between the common law juris, but that I still have to study to expound on further. Then we have the Oxford dictionaries, which are exceptional. They're excellent reference, of course, with the reputation of Oxford, often also used in the law. And believe it or not, much of the law is also based on biblical principles. And I believe specifically the 1611 King James Version Bible. Now, it's basically codifying scripture into statutes, codes, and laws, or maxims in equity. So it's pretty interesting. That's again, a deep subject to study, can be a lifelong journey. So that's just a really brief thing on dictionaries. Of course, we know a lot about regular dictionaries. Wikipedia, not the greatest thing, which would be more of an encyclopedia, not a dictionary, but those sorts of things. Online dictionaries may not necessarily be the best form of reference. And here we get where etymology comes in, because you'll notice as you go through the different versions of dictionaries that have evolved over time, that there are changes in how words are defined, right? So that's why it's kind of fun to start with the etymology on the AI with Gemini, because of that, the etymology, how words change over time. So here out of the American Heritage Dictionary, we have, again, American. So here we go, American continent, American understand, an intransitive verb, one, to become aware of the nature and significance of, know or comprehend. So one of the things that I've noticed in the state national movement, where really it really seems to be just a lot of people who care a great deal about people's rights and true knowledge, comprehension of history and law in words. So a good foundation of words will help you better comprehend the history and the law. So here we are in the words. So in the American Heritage Dictionary, you can see the definition becomes more of what we would probably typically expect it to be. The first one, of course, was to know or comprehend. The second, to become aware of the intended meaning of a person or remark, for example. The third, to know and be tolerant or sympathetic toward. So even here in the American Heritage Dictionary, it even though it may seem to be a more typical definition as opposed to the oldest version where it was to stand between, not under, but between. Now we're seeing there's also a sympathetic perspective here. So that's interesting. And now, because here I pulled out a couple things from Black's Law, fourth and sixth editions. Understand, to know, to apprehend the meaning, to appreciate, as to understand the nature and effect of an act. Now, what's nice about Black's Law and Bouvier's, it also gives you reference to case law. And a lot of times here, because we are referencing law as opposed to just everyday activity, we actually see a reference to contracts with around understanding or understand. I found it interesting that they're actually, and perhaps this is where we go back to some of the things that I've heard about in the national community, people talking about how understand is to stand under, is perhaps because I actually can't find understand by itself as one word in these dictionaries. That is a fact. There is understanding, there is understand, or excuse me, understood, but there is no simply just understand. So now that is very interesting, and I'm sure we could expound on that further, but I'm not going to do that today because I did not research that. One of the things that I find when I go to research what would seem to be a simple word is that before I know it, it is a deep hole of research that ends up, it could turn these shows into an hour or two, it would seem. And that's not the point. My goal, as previously stated, was to keep these at 30 minutes or less, so we can just have a little fun with words, expand our knowledge, and hopefully get excited about doing some research to learn more. In the first Wednesday word, I had put in the description a fun little thing about, and I don't know that everyone will remember this, our generations are aging, but I know my grandmother used to keep a big fat dictionary, like it has to be like a foot thick. My mom still has it in the common area of the home. She didn't when I was a kid, but she did when my mom was, and my mom would talk about it. And so every time there was a question about what a word meant, Graham would tell my mom, go look it up, right? And so there's stories about there like out there like that, a lot of them, and we should remember that because our forefathers, our grandparents knew the importance of words, and we should try to remember them too. Doesn't mean we have to have a big fat dictionary in the common area, but it's good to know that words are important, not just modern translations of words, but the real origin of words. So in this case, under Bouvier's, I looked up in the eighth edition, both under and stand in the law dictionary, of course, because it didn't have understand by itself. So, of course, under seems obvious, but I'm going to read it. The term is sometimes used in its literal sense of below in position, but more frequently in its secondary meaning of inferior or subordinate. And it references a case, Millie v. Stoddard, S. Howe. It must have meant inferior or subordinate. So here, now it makes sense why the simple word understand in the law could certainly be construed as meaning in an inferior or subordinate position should you acquiesce to someone asking you if you understand them in a court of law. So now here it makes sense, right? Oh, and of course, stand by itself, to abide by a thing, to submit to a decision, to comply with an agreement. So then it does make sense. You may not want to acquiesce to a judge asking you rather, if you understand something. because in the law dictionaries, and I did look up several of them, I'm only showing these these ones here today. There is no definition for the word understand. There is only understanding or understood. I think there's some other versions too, but there is no understand in the law dictionaries. And we go back up here, except Black's Law, 4th and 6th. Black's Law, 4th and 6th did. So they're in the statutory system. You may be able to get away with acquiescing to understand without placing yourself in inferior position to, say, a judge or an attorney or law enforcement. But in the other Beauviers, you may actually be placing yourself in a position of acquiescing to inferiority if you were to agree that you understand something in an equity court or common law court of law. So sit on that for a while. That's, hopefully as I continue to evolve this show, we can get into more details on that and make some of the logic behind that more clear. But very interesting nonetheless. So I'm just going to finish reading these for Bouvier. Understanding, it may denote informal agreement or concurrence as to its terms. There again, not necessarily inferiority or being subordinate, but probably more contractually as far as being in agreement with a contract. Understood, agreed, and here we have a case reference. It falls short of alleging a distinct express contract. Interesting. So these are very, very specific distinctions between these words. I would call that out, even though they all seem to have the same root of understand. And again, here in Beauvier, understand is not referenced as a word, it's two words, and it does denote inferiority or subordination in the case of using under. So very interesting. And of course, I did decide to go a little bit into innerstand. So we'll go ahead and start here since we're here. The Urban Dictionary, innerstand, of course, I just looked this up on the internet from December 2017. Understanding is the neutral point of understanding and overstanding, with the knowing coming from a place of acceptance and unconditional love, not being skewed by the human consciousness, ego, dragon. Thus, eradicating the I am presence and replacing it with we are, seeing all as one. Boy, that is a rabbit hole right there. Holy mackerel. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with what the potential I am reference could be. I'll just say it real quick. I'm just kind of surprised it's in the Urban Dictionary and how they're relating it to innerstand. I didn't catch that before. So if you're not already familiar, I am is actually a reference to the Most High God out of biblical context, where there's a concept whereby that the Most High God, creator, cannot actually have a name because the Most High God is creator everything. So I'm not going to get into a biblical discussion, but that calls out a very interesting point that could certainly take one down a rabbit hole. So we'll leave that there and move forward. That was it for what I had put together. I'm going to flip back over to one more thing on the innerstand versus understand, or understand versus innerstand topic, because I had looked that up with Gemini, aka Bard, on our AI. And so it's interesting, again, not to overuse one of my favorite words, but I am. So, and hang on, I having a hard time getting back here to Bard. So what's really fascinating about all of this to me is how different other sources of information can define the same thing, right? So let's just hop down here because this is kind of fun. When you look at the difference between understanding versus understanding. Let's see. Understand can have several different meanings depending on the context. Here are some potential avenues to explore based on what you might be looking for. Understand generally signifies a profound and empathetic understanding that goes beyond mere knowledge. It delves into the realm of your own and others' motivations, feelings, and experiences. So I'm not going to, they talk about a music album. That's pretty neat. So we went over the understand and understand. And here we go. This is the bottom line, according to Gemini, of course, our AI engine today. Both understanding and understanding involve grasping information or concepts, but they differ in depth and perspective. Understanding, according to Gemini, definition, intellectual grasp of nature, meaning, or significance of something. Focus, external information, facts, and logical connections. Process, acquiring knowledge, analyzing data, and forming conclusions. Outcome, ability to explain, describe, or predict based on acquired knowledge. And then what it says about understanding in the same context. Definition, a deeper intuitive understanding that includes emotions, motivations, and personal experiences. Focus is internal world, self-awareness, and empathy. Process, introspection, reflection, and connecting external information to personal realities. Outcome, deeper level of self-knowledge, compassion, and connection to others. And then it gives us a nice little analogy, and that should give us a good place to stop, although I will leave this up on the screen as I read it. So understanding, knowing the species, leaf shape, and bark and texture, or bark and texture. So they're giving us an analogy based on a tree. And understanding, feeling the strength of the tree's roots, understanding its response to wind and sun, and appreciating its role in the ecosystem. So I think this is really a nice thing to get people started on diving into words and understanding. I thought that understanding as a word or understand was a really good place to start as a second word for the series because it again is helping us build a foundation to build on. I hope this has been helpful and that you have a great day. That's it, guys. That's all I've got. So I will see you next time.